Hey, everybody. Welcome to your Velvet Ashes Legacy podcast. Denise Beck here along with Sarah Hilkeman. Hey, Sarah.
Hey Denise, happy December.
Happy December. Do you know what's so fun as we look back at November is we got to be in person 2 times with each other.
We did, yeah. And it's going to be like 6 months before we get to be in person again.
I know. We actually said, see you in Italy. Like maybe that's the next time we're going to be in person is when we do the in-person retreat in Italy, which, hey, community, we have a couple of slots if you would like to join us in Tuscany in April. I
April,
mean,
yeah, April 10th through 13th. It's beautiful, and you get to be with other Velvet Ashes sisters and connect and be with Jesus. It's pretty special, guys. And yeah, there's just a couple of spots left, so check it out.
we were actually at a conference recently, one of the reasons we were together, and one of the ladies who has been in person with us came up to us and she was like, best retreat, best in-person experience retreat I've ever been on. It was wonderful. In fact, I wish I could go again. Can I make it happen? She's trying to like talk through, could I rearrange? Would my kids actually allow me to be gone this long? So I love hearing that it has meant something special to other women, and we would love to share that
Mm,
experience with you. So yeah, look at our
yes.
website if you'd like to know. Um, hey Sarah, this month, Velvet Ashes, the theme for December is echo. And that may seem like, what in the world does that have to do with December?
I know,
But
yeah, it's a unique one, but I'm really excited for it. So, yeah, Denise, can you talk about kind of what does that mean and how are we guiding conversations based on the echo theme this month?
well, I think when we were talking about echo, this idea of that Christmas song where it talks about repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy,
Hmm.
that kind of was like going in my mind. And I'm like, is that not what we are doing as women serving for this call on the field? Is we are repeating the echo of the sounding joy that we hope these people that don't know the Lord will begin to understand. And it is an echo that has been repeated from a heritage of men and women who have gone before us saying the same thing and repeating it to generation after generation. And we pick up that echo to just continue to echo the call that will hopefully be perpetuated for those to follow us. And so there's that aspect of the word echo and who we are and why we do what we do. But then there's
Hmm.
also this aspect of the word echo of sometimes an echo is when you are alone in a room and
Mm,
you just only hear yourself and you're wondering, does anybody else hearing this? Does it matter to anyone? And how this work can also feel really lonely. And, we were speaking at this conference recently, Sarah, and a woman came up to us and she said, when my husband died and I became a single widow on the field, I was actually told that I had no place, that there was no room for my voice and it didn't matter and no one would listen to me. And how many of those messages we as women have heard, whether it was from someone like that or just, like the gifts you have aren't quite the gifts that are going to make a
hmm.
difference, and how we can
Right.
feel so lonely in that. And what we want to do is just, be that other kind of echo that is just like the reverberation of many voices speaking truth to these women on the field, saying what you do does matter. The gift that you maybe have been told isn't the one that this world needs, that you just are reaffirmed that this is exactly who God made you to be. And there's no reason to feel like what you have isn't enough. And so that's what we hope to do here at Velvet Ashes, is just to be that echo cheering other women on to say, you are exactly the right person. You are exactly who God made you to be. And that is enough. And so as we enter into this month of December, we hope that the content and the rhythms that we're bringing you give you strength and help you to understand that you're not alone. We also hope that, as many other nonprofits do at the end of the year, we are trying to invite other people to join us to continue so that Velvet Ashes can continue to be a voice that echoes in this space. So we do have an end of year opportunity for people to help us continue with what we have in the future, which is some exciting stuff, some things that we are hoping will really elevate the voices of our community and do it for a fraction of the price of what it should be and is, and all of those things. So stay tuned for the years to come as we get to talk more about that. But yes, that's a theme for this month as
Love it.
echo. Yes. Um, One of the things we like to do as we talk about monthly rhythms are these fun polls that we do on social media. Sarah, let's talk about the poll we did that we're going to chat about this month.
So I love talking about books anytime.
You are the book
Just
club girl.
yes, I am. And it's just such a fun topic. So we did a poll about books and reading on our Instagram. So always like come follow us, jump in on those polls. We love getting to just see what our community is thinking and hear from you. So one of the things that we asked was how often people read. And this was so interesting to me. The majority of people read daily, 68%, but 10% answered they rarely read. And
Did that just
yeah,
hurt your soul, Sarah, as a reader?
it's a little hard for me to imagine. There was a season, I will admit, when I first got to the field that I felt like reading was not one of the accepted activities that I could partake in. It was like, okay,
Oh.
I have to be studying language, I have to be practicing, I have to be, like going to the market and using my language and all of these things. And so there was, I think it was like 6 months where I did not read at all, and my soul just was hurting
Mm.
from that.
That is such a good point, though. Or you feel like this is a selfish activity unless I'm
Right,
reading a nonfiction, theologically
right.
deep book. And um, yeah, that is such a good point. I will say there were seasons in my life as a mom with 4 kids that
Sure.
reading was my eyeballs would not stay open. Like if I actually could sit down long enough to bend my knees in a chair while I was holding a book, I was probably exhausted. And so
Mm,
I could see in that season, or, you're reading the children's books. And so, you
sure, yeah.
get involved in that as well. But I am so curious, Sarah. One of the questions that was asked was, how do you read? Pages, ebook,
Right.
audiobook. What
hmm
what is your scenario, or are you all three?
I do all three, and it just kind of depends. One of the luxuries, I guess, of being back in my passport country is having a library and having access to physical books. But even when I was on the field, I would reserve space in a suitcase for a physical book and then like trade them out, bring the one or two home that I had and then bring two more because it just felt like such a gift. I will say though, I am so thankful for Kindle and ebook and that access that I could have while I was on the field.
Oh, so yeah. What do you audiobook at all?
I didn't, I don't think I didn't while I was on the field. I do sometimes now. It's not my top choice. Unless
Mm.
it's maybe like a really good memoir feels like a good audiobook choice, but
Oh, where the author is reading it, because
yes.
that, oh,
Hmm.
for sure, for sure. I must say, if I was percentage wise, I am probably like 75% audiobook, because
Hey.
I can do it while I'm doing other things. And so maybe
Mm,
that goes back to those days on the field where it's like, is this productive for somebody else besides myself? I don't know. Um, but I really, here's my breakdown. You didn't ask for it, but you get it anyway. I like an audiobook if it's fiction. I
mm.
like a physical book if it's a memoir or nonfiction, because I am a scribble in my book kind of person. So I am also not a library book girl for that reason, because I like to take notes and make the page recognizable for when I'm going back to search for
Hmm.
that thing. Because I'm
Sure.
also then I'm going to talk about this book with every person that I see. So I especially like to mark up my books. The ebook Kindle, I was on the field. I was an ebook Kindle kind of person. I really wish, and maybe they do this, but like that there was a digital version of a book that you could actually write on in a way that didn't totally rearrange the page. And
Mm,
maybe maybe there's that capability. I don't know. But like, I want to write a note and I want to stick on that page exactly where I wrote it. And then maybe I would trade in my physical book for
Mm,
an ebook. My bookshelves would really appreciate that capability because I just had to stack a whole bunch of books on the floor because they have outgrown the bookshelf space that we have.
right. Yes.
But was there anything else surprising about our little thing? Most people are fiction readers, 49%
Mhm.
of our poll, followed by nonfiction. And people like a good reading goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Although most people just go for, I just want to read. They don't set a goal, which is
That's
fair.
true. Just pick up a book and go. What is, maybe you don't remember this, but what is the highest either reading goal or book goal that you achieved in a year?
Mm. This is the reason I love Goodreads because you can set, and maybe there's other platforms where you can set your goal and kind of see your progress. I probably the highest I've gotten is in the 50s, 50 some.
50 some. So there was a season on the field when I read over 100 books in a year, but I realized for me, that means I am checking out of reality. It was like I
Mm,
am struggle busing in my season, and every minute that
interesting.
I could, I am trying to enter a different world. Get me out of here. It's too
Okay.
hard. So that is a good barometer for me to realize, maybe you're not dealing with some hard things and you're trying to escape too much if you have time to read 100 books during the year.
Mm,
And maybe that's not everybody's scenario. That was what I was
right.
realizing was true for me.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah. I know we have some friends even in our community, like in our book club, who can read 100 books in a year. And yeah, I don't know.
yeah,
Their situation may not be the same scenario,
right.
but yeah.
Well, I will say it was not 100 nonfiction books. It was 100,
Yeah,
you know, get me to somewhere that's not 135 degrees in my mind kind of books. But
sure. Yeah.
yes. Well, speaking of maybe self reflection and getting you to a better place, we have something in the Velvet Ashes community coming up. Do you want to talk a little bit about our Advent retreat, Sarah?
I would love to. This is such a sweet rhythm that has been part of our community the last few years. Danielle Wheeler leads us through about an hour and a half of space, really, to process and focus on Jesus in the midst of sometimes. Sometimes the Advent season can feel hectic and busy, and it's a time when there's like so many ministry opportunities, and sometimes it can feel incredibly lonely and so different than what life is like in our passport countries, and it could be both of those things too. But this Advent retreat is our gift to our community. It's free. And so it will be Saturday, December 6th at 9 a.m. US Eastern, 1400 UTC. And if you can't join live, we would love for you to join live. It's really, really special to be there live. But if you can't join live, you will get the recording of it. But yeah, it's just this sweet space to sit and reflect and be with Jesus, and get to interact with other women who also get this cross cultural life and what it's like to walk through Advent and Christmas in a place that might be very different in the comments.
So that's a good thing to point out that this retreat is different than other retreats that we do at Velvet Ashes. Other
Yes.
retreats have a retreat guide that's downloadable. Some of them have video content with it. This is a live call where there will be a screen shared that will be inviting us to move through things together as a community. Your
Hmm.
face will not be on the screen, but you will
Right.
get the benefit of the comment section, which is filled with women from all
Yes.
over the world saying, my screen is on too. I am sitting here with my journal too. I am working through this together as we sit and share a space across the world at the same time. So while the recording will create the space for you, you will miss out on that, realizing that moments
Hmm.
together is happening all over the world, and you could interact in the chat with your sisters
Yes.
across the world. It's a
Yes.
really special thing. We so appreciate how Danielle has been doing that for years for us on Velvet Ashes. But another really special thing is the actual podcast episode that we have for this month. And this is a really fun one because Sarah gets to interview a professor of hers about his mother. Sarah, talk a little bit
Yeah,
about your talk with Rick Clark.
this was a really special conversation for me. So I interviewed my Spanish professor from college, Rick Clark, about his mom, Marian Clark. So Marian actually would have been a contemporary of Elizabeth Elliot serving in Ecuador. And she was an amazing lady. I actually got to travel to Ecuador with both Professor Clark and his mom, Marian, for a summer study abroad while I was in college. And so just having that, personal connection, but then also I learned so much in this conversation about her story and um, her journey and some of the challenges and the joys of her story and her work in Ecuador and um, her transition back to the States and all of that. So yeah, I am excited for you all to um, get to know Marian through this conversation.
Sarah, I'm so excited for our listeners that they get to experience that. Hey, and just the connections that through time end up serving in different ways, right? As your professor, but
Mhm.
then now as, get to
Yeah.
dig into his story with his mom. And, and we're just so thankful for the connection that we have with Barnabas International that allows us to connect you to these stories. So thanks, Barnabas International, for sponsoring this podcast. And we hope you enjoy this conversation with Rick Clark.
Every voice part of the symphony. A hallowed polyphony. The messy middle mystery. The legacy of mercy, baby. Ooh.
Professor Clark, thank you so much for being here to chat with me today. I'm really excited about this.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great privilege to talk about my mom.
Yeah. Well, we are talking about the life and the legacy of Marian Clark, as you said, your mom, which is really special. And just as we start out, as we get into, Ecuador is a pretty special place that is part of your mom's story and your story. And I actually got the amazing opportunity to travel to Ecuador with both you and your mom. I won't say how long ago. It was a long time ago when I was in college for a summer study abroad. And that trip was so impactful for me in a number of ways, including my cross-cultural journey and the way that the Lord was calling and speaking to me. And as I was thinking about this and thinking about your mom on that trip, the image that came to mind was when we flew on a tiny little plane into the Amazon jungle. And we were amongst a tribe there, and there was kind of a schoolhouse that I think was where we were staying. And the picture I have is your mom sitting on the steps of that wooden schoolhouse, and she had her knitting. She had her knitting like everywhere we went on that trip, this like white yarn. And I don't know how she kept it clean the whole time, but she was just sitting on the steps knitting in the midst of the heat and the dust and the mud and the bugs, and just had the most peaceful, content, at home smile on her face.
Yeah, that
And
was very, very typical of mom.
mm,
I don't know that I ever remember her not knitting, even when like I was a little kid.
really,
And she was always making stuff for other people. And she would make
wow,
me a sweater, and then for any baby that was born, she was making baby clothes, and then she got into making Afghans. And I think every one of my kids and Karen and I have big Afghans that we snuggle up
wow,
with still that mom made. When she came to live with us here in Orange City, I remember going to my son's basketball games with her, And sure enough, Mom would be there in the stands knitting away during a basketball game, and everybody would look over and go, "What's that lady doing at a
Yeah.
basketball game?" And that's just what she did.
Wow. Well, I love that. I love that that is also the memory that I have of her.
Yeah, that's neat.
And that was such an important part of her life. Well, we want to get into her story, and I'm so grateful that you are here to tell her story. Your mom not only served in Ecuador as an adult, but also grew up there. And so, can you start out just talking about kind of her childhood? What kind of work her parents were involved in, kind of what you know of her faith story as well.
So my mom was born in Chicago on April 29 in 1925. She has always been a writer. So some of the things I'm going to mention here will be in her words. So I hope they won't be confusing to everybody. But this first part is how Mom describes what she felt like as a young kid. So this is a quote. "I was born before I should have been because my mother had planned to continue her concert piano studies at the Chicago Conservatory, but she was ill her whole pregnancy and hated it. I was born what I shouldn't have been because my mother always said I should have been a boy. When I was about 12, I asked her why, and she told me, 'You talk like a boy, you think like a boy, you act like a boy.' So I was pretty sure that God didn't make mistakes and was awfully glad when later that year I found two verses, Psalm 139, 'You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb.' And Jeremiah 1:5, 'I knew you before I formed you.' So God did know, and He made me who I am, and He has promised that He, who began the good work in me, will continue His work until it is finally finished on that day when Christ Jesus comes back again." End quote. So that's a little bit about how Mom felt. Mom felt growing up. My grandma and Grandpa Jones were from Chicago and from Ohio. And my Grandpa Jones was always involved in evangelism, street evangelism, music evangelism with Paul Rader in Chicago. And then he felt the call of God to start a radio station. It's a long story, so it's not really about that part of Mom right now. But when Mom was 7, she traveled with her mom down to Ecuador. My Grandpa Jones was recruiter, bringing missionaries, talking to missionaries, traveling all over, fundraiser, and basically the president of the organization that was called HCJB World Radio, now known as Reach Beyond. So Grandma and Grandpa Jones were very, very involved in the mission. Everything was about the mission. My grandpa was literally a world-class trombone player, and my grandma played the organ. And my mom remembers that she had a lot of responsibility as the eldest for child and caregiving within the family.
Okay.
And I think she resented that a little bit in that she felt like the mothering was passed off to her. And so she had to spend a lot of time so that keep everybody quiet while they were doing the mission work. And so, but what it did was it caused her to use her creative imagination, and she started telling stories, and she would make up songs to keep them entertained. And God was preparing her for the roles that she would play as an actress, a director, musician, and writer for HCJB, and then later for television.
Wow.
When mom went to Ecuador, Quito was a really small city.
Okay.
And now it's got 1 million people and all the rest of it. But at that point, it was really quite small because it was 1932. And they started a radio station. And the interesting part is that, Sarah, as you know, a lot of times when missionaries go into a place, the people that understand their need for Jesus are the poorer people. And that was not true in Ecuador because the poor people couldn't afford a radio. So the ones that bought the radios were the rich people, and they were the ones that were listening to this radio station. And so it ended up that Mom and Dad would have contact with all these rich people, so that when I was growing up, the man who was the president of of Ecuador and the mayor of the city of Quito were people that my mom and dad had played with as kids. So God just worked that together for them to have contacts with the government and get things done for the mission. My mom remembers as a little girl that she was the only blonde one in a sea of brown eyes and brown hair. And of course, the difficulty of not being able to speak the language right away. But everybody just came up and wanted to touch her hair. And I think those memories made her especially partial to her grandchildren who had brown eyes and brown hair. When she was 13, jumping a little bit,
Yep.
they had to return to the U.S. for furlough. They traveled to 40 states, and of course, they had to be on their best behavior. And, as a missionary, you're going to all these churches and you're dressing up in Ecuadorian costumes and you're singing Spanish songs. And she would describe it as one of the worst years of her life.
Oh.
And to make it worse, if I just back up just a little bit, sorry. But when the first couple of weeks that Mom was in Quito, she went to a birthday party for a boy, and at that birthday party, it was she had a great time. She came back and she announced to her family that she had met the boy that she was going to marry.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's so cute! Ha 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 ha!
Yeah.
And she had, and she loved my dad from that when she was 7, all the
Really?
way until her end of her life, and so. One of the reasons I say that is because jumping back, when she was in the States for a year, there was another girl who started to date my dad. And my mom
Really?
was furious. And so she wanted to get back to Ecuador so that she could tell this girl that he was hers and so forth. So I don't know for sure exactly when my mom asked the Lord to be her savior. I do know that when she was at Hunter College, so we're jumping now into the college there.
Uh-huh.
In New York, it was a defining relationship. Obviously, growing up on a mission field, at that point, the priorities in the families were that God was number 1, the mission was number 2, and family was number 3. Mm-hmm. And I experienced that as a kid growing up too. It was always the mission, and family seemed to come later. I am really thrilled that balance has changed.
Right.
And that people are understanding the importance of family and that it's not only mission. And I watched people that were trying to save the world and losing their family because they didn't have time to. And I remember saying to the Lord, I'm not going to do that. I just can't live with that. So that kind of caused in my mom and dad the desire to never be missionaries, never be involved in any mission work. And they were both bilingual. Had grown up in, this high-level society in Ecuador, so the level of their Spanish was exceptional. And they both decided that they were going to go to college and then go to the United Nations and make a ton of money being interpreters at the United Nations. And that was their goal. And they knew that God didn't want them to be a missionary. So Mama's in Hunter College, and as a college student, she is teaching a Sunday school class at the local church where she was going. And she was talking about God's call on her life and so forth. And there was one young lady who was a little bit of a smart aleck. And so at the end of class, she was leaving and she turned around and she said, "So, Miss Jones, what about the calling in your life?" And didn't know what to respond because saying that she wanted to be a translator and interpreter at the United Nations just didn't seem like the right thing. So she started praying and she talked to other people and talked to the Lord about it. And she decided that, yes, God did want her to go and be a missionary. Okay. So she wrote my dad a letter and she said, "Well, I have to break off our engagement because God has called me to be a missionary." And in God's perfect timing, my dad had reached the same conclusion. And their letters actually passed in the mail.
Oh, my goodness.
Each other. And of course, in those days, it was like $30 a minute to talk on the phone. But they picked up the phone and they got their relationship all taken care of and decided that they were going to be missionaries and they were going to serve the Lord that way.
Okay.
So, another one of those aha moments when God says, my thoughts are completely different than your thoughts.
Right.
I know what I have for you. And Mom didn't want to be labeled as a Christian fanatic, but God knew that that's what he had for her.
Wow. That is so, and I think that for those who have grown up with that legacy of cross-cultural workers, of missionaries, there can be that pressure of, I have this great legacy, I have to carry it on. And so I so appreciate that she had her own calling, that she wrestled with it, that both of your parents did. Because I think that is so important rather than just, okay, this is what has been modeled for me, and so I need to do it just sort of out of
Right.
duty.
Well, and I think that's really wise, Sarah, because I would say that I struggled with the same thing.
Yeah.
I knew that I was going to go back and be a missionary with my mom and dad. And when I found out that God had gifted me as a teacher, it was really hard to say, is this enough? Is that good enough? I'm not going to be a famous missionary. People aren't going to make
Right.
movies like they did about my grandpa and write books about my grandpa, And so, yeah, that your own personal calling is pretty huge.
Yeah, I that was something that I want to ask you later on too. So we'll come back to that. But your parents went back to Ecuador pretty quickly after they got married. Is that right?
They did. And you can imagine that they had spent all their young lives in Ecuador. My dad was as Ecuadorian as anybody I've ever met. And he knew phrases and sayings and everything that no other Anglo people knew and so forth. So they were very Ecuadorian. And one of the things I loved about my parents as missionaries was that they didn't stay in this Anglo world, that they lived out in the community and so forth. And so I got to experience that. But anyway, so you can imagine that they didn't have any contacts in the United States. So you know what it's like trying to raise money and how difficult it is, period, just to be able to get people to support and to come into the vision.
Yeah.
And they got super discouraged because nobody knew them. And so they would go to a church and people would go, yeah, but we don't know who you are or what, is going to happen and so forth. And yeah, so your parents are famous, but, and so they got really discouraged. And this is another Writings of Moms. And this is in the early stage of their married life as they had decided that they were going to be missionaries. Quote, the mission board was discouraged. The pastor of the small church we had attended was discouraged. The train conductor was discouraged. I was discouraged. And Bob sure was discouraged as he puked into another tall trash can on the New York Grand Central platform. But the hurrying, arriving crowd swirling around us, the belching smoke of the train engines, the noise, all disappeared as I handed yet another wad of toilet tissue to my relatively new husband, and he wiped his mouth. Sucking air in through his nose, he let it out through his mouth until the nausea receded. Then he lifted bleary eyes to me and said, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we're not supposed to be missionaries. End quote. Maybe they didn't like the way we looked, Mom says, or they didn't like that I was pregnant, or maybe we were too young, or maybe our former quarterback Uncle Chet was right, that only failures who couldn't do anything else became missionaries. I can remember my Uncle Chet saying that on numerous occasions. Maybe we didn't have to swallow our pride and beg support in all these tiny brethren churches on Long Island that we were already scheduled to visit. Maybe we were supposed to stay and make money at the United Nations like we'd always planned, and God could send someone else. Maybe. So then Mom and Dad were called to a commissioning service at Calvary Baptist Church in New York City, a big, big church. And there was a man by the name of Glenn Chambers who was going to be a missionary in Ecuador. And the Women's Society in Ecuador, in that commissioning service, gave him a Bible. And Calvary Baptist was supporting him to go to be a missionary in Ecuador. So since they'd grown up in Ecuador, he wanted to know about the culture and all that kind of thing and so forth. So he flew to Ecuador. And on February 15th, 1947, the Avianca Airline DC-4 flight bound for Quito, Ecuador, crashed into the 14,000-foot high peak of El Tablazo, not far from Bogota, Colombia, and then dropped, a flaming mass of metal, into a ravine far below. There were no survivors. So one of the victims, of course, was that young New Yorker named Glenn Chambers, who had planned to become a minister with the Voice of the Andes. But the rest of the story. The couple who took Glenn Chambers' place at Voice of the Andes were my mom and dad. Years later, when missionaries went to Tablazo to evangelize, they found a village full of Christians. And the man that was the head of the tribe, he motioned to a little boy, and the boy went back into another hut, and he pulled out, and they had Glenn Chambers' Bible that had survived.
Wow. Oh, wow.
And they had read the Bible, and they had believed it. And they said, we've been waiting for somebody to come and baptize us. How come it took you guys so long?
Wow.
And my mom and dad would often say, Jesus Christ gave his life to die for us so that we could live eternally.
Mm-hmm.
And really, in reality, Glenn Chambers gave his life, and New York, the Baptist church there supported them for the entire. Every time we came home to furlough, we always went to that church. They always treated us so well, and for almost 40 years, they supported my mom and dad's missionary work. So it's just again God using tragedy to
Yeah.
make something wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just that reminder that our stories are so connected, and we never know how God is going to use something. Something as tragic as that plane crash and that loss, and yet the Bible surviving. It's just wow, that is
Yeah,
incredible.
it is incredible.
So talk a little bit about the work that your parents did in Ecuador when they went back as a married couple.
So when they first went back, it was radio, and they
Okay.
worked in radio for many years. And my mom wrote scripts. With her Spanish ability, she did a lot of translation of hymns and musicals and things into Spanish, and concerts for Ecuador. Music was a huge part of the ministry of HCJB. HCJB actually had a program every Sunday night that they broadcast back to the United States with tens of
Okay.
thousands of listeners, and they
Wow.
did hymns and everything on Sunday night, and sat around. So music was a big part. And then one of the interesting things was we don't know much about shortwave radio, but shortwave radio is something that can go a long, long distance. And at first, my grandpa was told that Quito, Ecuador was the worst place to start a radio station. And he goes, this is the door God has opened. This is what we're going to do. And years later, he came back to the United States, and the engineers were a little shamefaced and said, Dr. Jones, we just have to tell you that we have now determined that Quito, Ecuador is probably the best place on the planet to have a radio station. They were reaching around the world, and literally there was no place in the world that could not hear this radio station.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so they ended up having a French department and a German department, and of course a huge Spanish department, and languages from all over. And these people would come from Japan, and they would be missionaries in Ecuador broadcasting programs back to Japan. So that's what mom and dad were involved in with all of that and their work. So they did that for a lot of years. Took a year and went to Guayaquil, lived on the coast, and started a radio station there and so forth. My dad had an early morning devotional program at 6:00 every morning that was on the radio. And I can remember as a kid going downtown, and people would say, "Hey, Don Roberto, I heard your program this morning." So it was really interesting how God used that. But they were in radio. And then when I was in, I think maybe 8th grade, Grandpa Jones came to my mom and dad and said, "We are going to start a television ministry, and we want you to head it up." And my dad said, "Absolutely no." He said, "God called me to radio. I'm in radio. I'm not doing anything else. Just forget it." But my Grandpa Jones was not somebody you said no to. And Grandpa Jones says, "No, this is what God wants you to do." And he said, "I want you to go to the United States and go to college for a semester and learn how to run a TV station, and then come back and run a TV station."
Wow.
They had an engineer from General Electric who had taken 5 or 7 years to put together all the equipment you would need for a TV station in his basement. And so he came to my grandpa and he said, "Dr. Jones, I have this TV station." And my grandpa said, "Well, we're not interested." And the guy goes, "What do you mean we're not interested? I've been 5 years putting this all together for you guys." And he goes, "Well, we're not interested unless you come and run it with us." The guy goes, "I'm vice president at General Electric. I'm not going to come and go to South America. I didn't speak Spanish or anything." And Grandpa said, "Well, then give it to somebody else. I believe that God wants you to come and be with us and do it."
Wow.
6 weeks later, my grandpa got a phone call almost at midnight, and he didn't know who it was. And the guy goes, "I give up, Dr. Jones." And he goes, like, "Who is this? What is this?" And he
Right.
goes, "God has been working on my heart for 6 months, and I guess I'm going to be a missionary in Ecuador."
Oh, wow.
So he came and he brought all that equipment. And then my dad went to the United States for a semester and took a bunch of classes, and they came back and they started a television ministry. So that was a big change. And I think really that's where my mom shined. Because all of
Really?
a sudden her creativity, and she had learned so much about the culture that they did cultural programs and they shared the indigenous culture and the of different tribes in Ecuador and did programming on that so that it was, people were learning stuff that they didn't know about their own country. And then mom started a cooking program.
Okay.
And she would show people how to cook something. And we always thought it was wonderful because I was working on the camera crew at the time. I found that if I wanted to be with my parents, I had to go to the mission and I had to start work there. So that's basically what I did in high school when I wasn't playing sports. So mom would bake one that was completely finished, and then she would have all the ingredients. So those of us that were there at the TV station after she was all done with the program, we got to eat the one that she'd already made. We all thought it was fabulous. So she did the television, the ministry with that. She did a music program where she was playing the organ.
Okay.
And had that. She did monologues of Bible characters, and she would dress up and have all this makeup on. And so she was different women in the Bible, and she would do a 20 to 30 minute. And we have looked for those to see if we could find any copies of them or so forth. They really were exceptional. And people had, so much more. And she would do those in English when we would travel in the United States as well.
Okay.
She did puppet characters and had a kids show on Saturday mornings that kids watched. And then I think I mentioned the musicals and the hymns she translated, legends and stories that she did. So really television was something that allowed her to use her gifts. And it was really marvelous for her.
Wow. I love that so much. I love that. Yeah. We don't always think about using creativity in that way as part of sharing the gospel and encouraging believers and part of mission work. And so I love just that example of really the creativity of the Lord, and the ways that he can use us in so many different ways. One thing that I was curious about as we kind of think about just the historical context of this, your parents would have been in Ecuador at the same time as Jim and Elizabeth Elliott. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Did they have any interaction with them at all?
Yeah. At that point in Ecuador, everything was small, like I said. So in the 50s everybody knew all the other missionaries. It didn't make any difference what denomination you were from. You were missionaries, you were serving the Lord, and we knew what different denominations people were from, but it really wasn't that important. And so I remember myself coming to the United States and people asking me, what am I? I'm going, I don't know. I'm a Christian. I don't know. I didn't know much about all the different denominations, but yeah, we they had a lot of contact with Jim Elliott, and then my contact with that whole story is that the young men who lost their fathers in that tragedy became my best friends growing up. So really? Jerry Udarian was my best friend, and we spent a ton of hours playing basketball together and so forth. So that was my contact, and I remember my dad really becoming kind of a surrogate dad for Jerry, and just Jerry was over all the time. And so that was our contact with it. And I remember the young men saying, I know that a lot of people have come to know Jesus through this tragedy, but I still grew up without a dad. Right. So again, the pain that was still there within the story. But yeah, the amazing part of how God has used that story. So.
Yeah. Do you have any other stories of memories of your mom as you were growing up in Ecuador, or kind of from that time in their life?
I talked about how if I wanted to be a part of the of my mom and dad, I had to go to the mission. So during the summers, I would work there at the mission station, different projects and television and so forth. This was not 24 hours television, right? This was television from 6 o'clock at night to 10 o'clock at night. Okay. And then my grandpa Clark would do the evening devotional at 10 o'clock, from 10 o'clock to 10:10. And so my mom and dad work on most every night, working at the TV station. So they didn't get to a lot of the sports activities or the music things that I was involved in. So I remember feeling some resentment about that, but you still knew that God was working. One of the interesting things that came out of that TV ministry was that there were people that were listening to TV but would never think of darkening an evangelistic church. I mean, evangelical church, sorry, which of course in a Catholic country would have been hard anyway.
Right.
And so mom and dad ended up starting a church that was basically, they called it a TV church because it was people that were interested in the gospel that had been listening to the TV. And so that's what I went to every Sunday morning during high school. That was a pretty fun part of that. I think the other thing that I remember a lot about when I was growing up was we had a lot of single women that were absolutely fabulous servants of the Lord in Ecuador as missionaries. So a lot of them were from, like, one was from Sweden and one was from different countries. Like I said, broadcasting programs back to their country. But mom had a special ministry to those single women.
Okay.
And so we would often have them over for Sunday lunch or for an evening. And it was another part of her ministry that I always thought was really cool because they did a great job of loving on those ladies that were serving the Lord with such fervor and such intensity. So I think that's most of what I remember of some of those.
Yeah. So what brought your family back to the U.S.? Did you come first, or how did that all work? What was that transition like?
So it was pretty normal for most of the missionary kids when they graduated from high school to come to the United States. Unless their parents were missionaries from another country. Some of them would go back to England, some of them would go to Switzerland, or some of them would go to New Zealand. But most of us, they were missionaries from the United States. So we would come back to the United States. So after having spent most of my life in Ecuador, showing up in the United States, I was a foreigner. I didn't feel comfortable in the United States culture and so forth. But that's how that worked. So my sister left when she graduated. The Ecuadorian Army had a rule that you had to serve in Ecuadorian Army for 2 years. And so I go, I'm out of here. I'm not serving in the Army. Thank you very much. So that was another thing that pushed me to the United States. And then a couple of years after that, there was some disagreements in the mission. And the leaders of the mission had decided that they were going to make the television station 100% Christian and only Christian programming. And my dad's going, who's going to watch that? I mean, I love the Lord. He says, I don't want to watch Christian programming all the time. And he said, not only that, television costs so much money, you can't ask churches in the United States to pay for all that programming. There's just not that kind of funds. We had advertisements, and so we had Lassie and those kind of shows and everything translated into Spanish and all the cultural shows and so forth. So it wasn't just a Christian thing, and game shows and that kind of thing that were on the TV at the time. So my dad could be really hard to work with at times, and he said, "I'm not doing that." He said, "So they gave him another responsibility, and it wasn't really working out, and then." All four of their parents were still alive and needing help. And so mom and dad decided that it was time for them to come back to the United States and help with the health of their parents and do that. So that's where the transition they made. I think they were 38 and a half years or something as missionaries in Ecuador, and then came to the States. And of course, that was a hard transition for them too.
Yeah. Because
they were still mostly Ecuadorian.
Right.
And for them, it was a culture shock as well, but nobody knew them. Most people, not most people, a lot of people in Ecuador knew them, right? And they were highly respected. And now they come to the States and they didn't know a job. And so my dad got a job at a mega church in Florida.
Okay.
And so, but he basically was just copying cassette tapes and doing some sound stuff and everything. And it was hard for him, and it was humbling. Yeah. And God, again, reinforced him becoming a greater servant for the Lord in that process. And then my mom worked with the pastor of that church, and she edited his books and then wrote study guides for the books that he had done. And she did that. And then when that kind of finished up, then she got a job at a lawyer's office. And so it was all brand new for her too. And all of a sudden, she was in charge of this big database thing, and she'd never done anything with it before. And I think we'll probably talk about it later, but I think that's one of the legacies from my mom that I have had is that
Mm-hmm.
she was never scared of technology. She was
Hmm.
never like, oh, I don't know, this is, what, just going to change things and it shouldn't be,
Right.
and she just embraced it right up from the moment of television. Say, okay, boom, we're going to do television now. How do we do it?
Right.
And so she got into this lawyer's office and she learned how to do it. And I think that impacted me a lot in terms of saying,
Mm.
okay, when something new would come out in my teaching, I would go, okay, let's learn this. Let's figure out how to do it. And so that's what they did. They cared for their parents for a lot of years in their home. My grandma and
Okay.
grandpa Clark lived with my mom. I don't know that I have how long they did,
Mm-hmm.
but she was. They were very faithful in doing that. So that's what happened
Okay.
as they came back.
You mentioned earlier, kind of wrestling with your own calling of whether that was to go to Ecuador or, as you said, really sensing the Lord's hand on gifting you as a teacher, and walking down that path. Did you ever feel any pressure or have any like encouragement from your parents or from your mom that you should be a missionary and go back to Ecuador or somewhere else?
I think, Sarah, I think it might have been different had they still been on the mission field. But,
Mm-hmm.
I was in my last couple of years of college and
Okay.
they returned to the United States. So there wasn't that same draw because, I
Right.
couldn't go back and work with them.
Right.
And so, no, I never really felt any pressure to do
Okay.
that. I know a lot of people that, they struggle their whole life to try and figure out how has God gifted me? What should I do?
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel so blessed that in my senior year at college, I just discovered that God made me a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing stuff that I didn't have any idea what I was doing or why I was doing it. I was just having a great time. And all of a sudden, people are going, whoa, you're really good. And I go, I'm not doing anything. But it really was a gift from God. And
Mm-hmm.
so that really settled into my soul and said, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is what God has created me for. And
Yeah.
so that's a pretty special thing to be able to have found that at that
Yes.
point and to be able to say, yep, this is what he wants me to do.
Yeah. Well, you are one of my favorite professors. So, um, the Lord has used that. Uh, all right. Let's talk about that legacy as you kind of look back, as you think about the legacy of your mom and your parents. How would you describe that legacy?
I think a sense of total commitment to God. I'm sure
Mm,
my parents struggled with their faith like we all do. And there's things we'll just never understand till we get to heaven about the whys and all the rest of that. But there was a sense of depth of commitment that
mm-hmm,
never was wavering. So it didn't make any difference what situation they were in. They were going to go, okay, what are we going to do for the Lord? How do we serve the
mm-hmm,
Lord in this? And so I think that was one of the legacy. I think the legacy of caring for family
mm,
has something that has impacted us. We used to have in our family a little inside family joke, right? And my dad would say, well, if mom dies first, I'm going to go live with Karen, who's my wife, right?
mm.
And so that was his daughter-in-law. And I would always say, Dad, but we haven't even invited you. And everybody would laugh and there would be this big joke and everything. At that point, my mom would always say, if Dad dies first, I'm not going to live with anybody. And
Hmm.
you could tell that it was because she had, taken care of her in-laws for 15 years in
Mm-hmm.
her house, and she knew the struggles with that, how hard it was, and everything. And so after Dad died, um, we all knew that Mom was just going to stay at the nursing facility that they were at in Florida at Penny Farms. And about 6 months after Dad's death, Karen and I were talking about it, and I really felt like we should ask Mom if she wanted to come live with us.
Hmm.
And and so we were talking on the phone and I said, Mom, would you ever consider that? And she just broke into tears and she goes, I am so lonely. I don't know what to do with
Mm,
myself. And so we kind of remodeled our house here a little bit. And Mom came and lived here for 15 years with us. And it was hard, especially for Karen, having your
mm-hmm,
mother-in-law in your
mm-hmm.
home. But my goodness, was it life-giving for my mom. She
Yeah.
came, and all of a sudden, she was teaching knitting classes to Hispanic women in the community. She was doing translation. She was going to Richie's basketball games and football
Mm-hmm.
games, and she just always had stuff to do here
Yeah.
with us and teaching a Bible study. She was an elder in our church and served on committees, and so when I think it could have been feeling like life was over, then all of a sudden that gave her new life. And so I think watching her take care of her parents was a legacy to me of saying, you know
Right.
what, family is important. So when we had to put mom into the nursing home and she was there for 5 years, it was one of the most difficult things Karen and I have ever done because we just wanted her to be here and
Right.
to die here with us in our house and go to be with the Lord. And that was not the plan. But I think that's one of the legacies, the importance of family and taking care of family. I mentioned the love of technology. I think thankfulness is something that was a part of my mom. She was just thankful for everything, and that has been passed down to me. And we would have people that work at the nursing home that would say, I don't know if we've ever had anybody that's so thankful as your mom. She's always thankful for this. She never complains. She never whines. And even if she's in pain, she might just say, well, maybe a little more medication, but so I think that's a legacy that I have seen. I think the love of missions and the love of wanting to share the gospel with people that don't know Jesus, that came certainly from my mom and dad. And in an incredible way, in the last 2 years, even though I'm retired, I have been twice to Africa, 3 times to South America, twice to Mexico. I mean, it's just God is dropping all these things that fit into that passion. It's absolutely amazing. I think the importance of prayer for your family has come from my mom and dad, because when my mom and dad eventually both went to be with the Lord, we all looked at each other and said, okay, so now who's going to do all that praying for the families? Because we knew that they had prayed for us every single day. And I think I mentioned that willingness to serve, the willingness to serve everything. If you're asked, just do it. So I think those are the ones that I listed of the what I have
Okay.
seen from my mom and my parents in my life, how they've been
Yeah.
legacy.
I love that you said your mom had such a special ministry in Ecuador to these single women who came to serve. Just thinking of younger women right now, if your mom had the opportunity to say something to them as they're considering cross-cultural service, or maybe they are serving on the field somewhere as missionaries, what do you think she would say to those younger women?
I think one of the things mom would say would be that there's no one calling that is higher than another. And she used to say, I don't know that missionaries need any more prayer than somebody in the United States, somebody in Africa. She said, we're all serving the Lord. And it's not like one is more special than another. And she would certainly say one is not more godly than another. It's just
Right.
your calling is your calling. So I know she would emphasize that. She would emphasize that there is no difference between the value of people. It doesn't make any difference about skin color. It doesn't make any difference their riches or lack of riches. She would say, learn to see each person as a child of God, created with an eternal purpose. That would be one thing. I think the other thing she would say is go to the culture, find somebody who is from that culture you can trust, and ask questions and get to know about the culture. Find out everything you can about that culture, and learn and learn and learn and learn. I mean, we all made a lot of mistakes in the Ecuadorian culture. It's just things you don't know and you just do them
Sure.
and so forth. Or we watch missionaries come and you go, ooh, that's not very Ecuadorian. But, you just learn. But that's how
Right.
she would say, go and learn and ask questions and so forth. And I think the third thing mom would say was, if you are willing, God will give you the power to do things that you could never imagine you could do. She experienced that, especially in television, because television, that whole concept was so overwhelming to them. They're going, we were just doing voice stuff, and now we got to do visual, and we got to do productions, and we can't do that, and concerts in Spanish and so forth. And mom would say, just say yes to whatever opportunities God gives you to serve, and let him use you, and let him bring those opportunities to you.
Wow. So good. Professor Clark, is there anything else, any other stories, anything else that you want to say about your mom?
One of the great blessings that we had was we had asked the Lord that my mom would not suffer in her death and that there would not be a ton of pain. And we had asked the Lord if we could be with her. And that's what happened. It doesn't happen for everybody. I understand that. And some people, Karen's mom suffered tremendously in her death. But we were there with mom, and I was holding mom's hand, and Karen had her hand on my mom, and mom had a little tiny tear that came down the side of her cheek, and she took a breath, and she was with the Lord. And it was just amazing. She wanted to live to be 100, and she was 5 months shy of being 100. I could never figure out why 100 was so important to her, but she says, I got to get to 100. I got to get to 100. But she was 99. But so that was really, really special for us.
Wow. Oh, Professor Clark, thank you so much for being willing to share her story. And I just think of how she has impacted my own life and the way that the Lord honestly really called me into missions work while we were in Ecuador.
Wow.
It was part of the story, and just the countless people who have come to know Jesus, who have come to a greater knowledge of the Lord and grown in their faith because of the legacy of your mom. And, she's maybe not famous. She's maybe not one of the names that we would know in some circles anyway, but that just shows how that faithfully following the Lord is such an important legacy.
Yeah,
So,
Sarah, you hit on the right word. It's faithfulness, isn't it?
Yep.
It's just
Absolutely.
faithfulness through everything, the ups and the downs, the super hard, the blessings and all the other things. But, you just know that when mom got there, it was well done, thou good and faithful servant.
Yes.
Pretty special.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to be with us on the podcast. And friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you'll join us next time for another episode of the Velvet Ashes Legacy Podcast.
Every voice